Well, let me welcome you to revolutions. Usually revolutions are not something that you welcome people to, and but here are revolutions in science and technology paradigms. And I need not to mention to you how science and technology really revolutionize the way we live. We are the creators of technology and followers of science, but whatever we invent comes back and changes our lives. And there are many stars, so to say, inventors and philosophers and you name it, in any field of technology, who were like stars. They lit the light for us, and we are following their steps. And it's always good to see how they did what they did and why they did it, to just understand how we deal with their inventions. Revolutions in science and technology paradigms is one of the sessions of the first EIU, Eastern Illinois University Technology and Science Symposium here in Charleston, Illinois. And as you see, this presentation is being videotaped, and it will be put online to the world. So maybe some people would see me in Australia or Mozambique or wherever. So we will have the wealth of experiences of our speaker, Cameron D. Craig. What are you going to tell us about?
I'm going to talk about the last of the universal geographers, Humboldt and Ritter.
It's all yours.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, guys. All right, yeah, the last of the universal geographers, it's an interesting topic. The thing is that we look at universal, and it is, the meaning of this is to have a comprehensive understanding of many or all aspects of a particular subject. So not only are we just talking about one field, but we're talking about many fields. Somebody that has a bunch of knowledge about everything. Now, universal understanding is all things relate and influence each other, such as climate and various other aspects as culture, topography, which is how the land is shaped. We're looking at history, music, psychology, anatomy. All these things interact. And many of the scientists and historians before the modern era, the mid-1800s, they began as universal whatever. They understood the interconnections, the influences, many aspects of their field and other fields. Now, what we're going to talk about are all these things, but I want to focus on history for a moment. History, which I began, my first degree is in history, and I learned that Ranke, who was a universal historian, essentially what he said was you cannot simply take, for example, the Civil War and say, this is the result of the Civil War, from when it began to when it ended. You can't do that. You have to look at the years before that led up to the Civil War, and then what happened after the Civil War that influences something else down the line. We can't just take a section of our life and say, I got a history degree because I liked history. No, I first started out knowing only but music. My mother said I can't do anything but music. I didn't like that. And so when my friends were getting no jobs, I realized I've got to do something different. So what else do I enjoy? So watching the History Channel, I said, I like history. So there's a history. Not only did I just say, the start of the fall semester, 1999, I said I was going to take history and go into history, but there are things that led up to that. One is working night shift at Columbia House, where you buy 10 CDs for a penny or whatever. So I didn't like that. It was a challenge. So these are things that led up to me being a historian. And then becoming a historian, I took weather and climate my last semester and physical geography, and my professor said, you've got a knack for this stuff. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go back and get a secondary degree in history so I can teach history. No, you're not. You're going to become a geographer. And what I found interesting, that there was interconnection. I thought that history explained everything about humanity, but not necessarily so. It was history and geography together that explains who we are on this planet. The interactions of the environment towards humanity. The things that happen in history, particular events, are influenced by other aspects of humanity and other aspects of the environment. And so I can now say that I am in a field that incorporates everything that could and will explain everything about the human record as well as the environment record. So that is essentially how I got to this day. Now, Alexander von Humboldt was a leading universal geographer. One thing before I go to that, let's, I got...
My apologies.
No, it's all right. What I found as I was in geography and taking geographic thought as a master's student is that a lot of the teachings in geography came from history. A lot of historians became geographers because they were so interrelated. And so that was exciting. I was a little step ahead in the philosophical thinking of what geography was because I already had all the historians and the history and all the historiography. But Alexander von Humboldt was a German. He was educated in the classical languages, mathematics, botany, physics, philology, archaeology, geology, chemistry. Anybody have all of those things under their wings? No? Yes? Maybe? Okay. But the thing is that he was so curious about the world that he lived in that he went to lecture after lecture after lecture after lecture, like you're doing now. And some of you are probably sitting there, oh, I'd rather be doing something else, right? He was in a position, director of mines in Franconia, which is in Prussia, and he was also appointed chamberlain to the court of the Prussian king. Now, his contributions, he went on an American expedition with several explorers. And essentially what he did is he went to South America first. Observations, or the Orinoco River Basin, essentially he paddled upstream in a canoe, just two of them, taking observations. Temperature readings, noting vegetation, sketching the landscape, taking water samples, collecting specimen, everything. He just grabbed everything that he could. When he got to Lake Valencia, he realized a problem that we have today: deforestation. The tribes in that area were deforesting the area around the lake, and he realized that the lake was dwindling. And so what happened was that when you have precipitation, it slows the rain down. I'm sorry, when you have vegetation, it slows the rain down so that it doesn't wash away or erode the soil away. And so that's what we've got today. This is 200 years before now. And here we've got this idea that we're okay, we'll just continue to develop. When we develop, we have a problem. We tear down trees, and then that's why we've got all these floods. We have extraordinary floods that because we deforest, or more importantly, let's go to Colorado. Colorado, we have the wildfires. The wildfires, due to something that we did in the 1920s and 30s, Smokey Bear, don't start forest fires. Well, we didn't. We suppressed fire. And so for 5 decades, we allowed the natural environment to build fuel. So I went to Colorado in 2002 during the wildfire, during the significant drought, and walking and hiking, I'm standing on 3 feet tall of needle leaves, dry. And so what happens, lightning strike, or somebody flicks a cigarette or doesn't put out their campfire, gets going, there's enough fuel, it gets out of control. Now you've got vegetation that's scorched, the land is scorched, when it rains, it pours, and then it causes major flooding, like we saw in Colorado a few weeks. He went into the mountains. He studied the geology of the Andes. He understood earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and went in to volcanic craters, climbed back out, found another one, went back down. He was always observing and collecting, observing and collecting. He discovered the Peruvian current by taking temperature readings of the water. He understood upwelling. In fact, they tried to call it the Humboldt current, but after a certain assembly, they decided to make these currents or names of currents as geographic, so Peruvian current. He went to New Spain, which is Mexico, and he looked at the population. He studied the population, looking at the census data from the churches, and then he looked at the production of maize and other products and compared them. He used statistics and the cultural geography to understand the prosperity of that environment. Now in Russia, his expedition in Russia, essentially this is where we get into the climate aspect, the distribution of temperatures by latitude. He understood that latitudinal distribution of temperatures is how it is across the world. You have warm temperatures near the equator, the tropics, and then it decreases with latitude towards the poles. He understood that. He also urged the creation of a weather station network. This is the early 1800s. He convinced the Tsar that in order to understand climate and humanity's place in that, we need to have a network of weather stations. Somewhat like the Chinese. Chinese have over 6,000 years of climate data, observations of the natural environment. And so the creation of a weather station network was very important. The first scientist to connect points of equal temperature. What are equal lines of temperature? Some of my students here. ISO. Oh. See, this is what I'm talking about. Universal knowledge. Isotherms. Everybody, répétez s'il vous plaît. Isotherm? Isotherm. Yes, isotherm. A first scientist to connect points of equal temperature. This is a map of temperature distribution using isotherms. And then he observed and described permafrost. What's permafrost?
Permanent frost.
Permanent frost, okay, but what is it? What is it?
Soil that's permanently frozen.
Yeah, soil that's permanently frozen. And it goes down to about 3 meters, is that correct? About 3 meters in Russia. What happens with global warming? Yes, it melts and then people sink into the soil. They live in stilts. They live in Russia, in Siberia. Their houses are not built on the land. They're built up off the land, because if their houses sat on the land, then they would sink, because the heat from the house would just sink into the soil. Yes. With global warming, the best thing to do is to get real estate in Siberia. Nice, fertile soil. Okay. He wrote a significant work, 6 volumes, called The Cosmos, 1845 to 1862. A complete picture of the universe. He described his interest and findings and observations that he took over years of exploring. It is a complete picture of everything that is the Earth, astronomy, the planets, and everything else like that. 6 volumes outlining Humboldt's interest in observations. A significant creature, or I should say not creature, academic. Carl Ritter, also German, born 10 years later than Humboldt. He essentially was his education, he was a pupil of new pedagogical procedures in the Christian Salzmann experiment school. The reason why he was selected was because he did not have the opportunity to go to school yet. And so Salzmann wanted somebody who wasn't influenced by the old teaching methods. And so he brought Ritter in, and then that's where we get the pedagogical aspects of Ritter. Ritter was an educator, geographer. It was customary during that time to learn things through rote. What does that mean? What does that mean? Huh?
Stories being passed down.
Yeah, you're memorizing. You memorize things, you write them down, and you memorize and you memorize and you memorize. You memorize the sayings in Greek, in Latin, and then you regurgitate them. And essentially, that was the old way. The new way was to actually observe and to disseminate that information. So the new method, a radical method of education, was to go out, experience it, observe it, and then bring it back, and you've learned something. Now, his significant contributions were educational. He was an educational geographer. He focused on the unity of man and the environment. He believed that the unity of man and the environment was God's divine plan. He fine-tuned field observations through sketches. He was a sketch artist. He went out and he sketched the landscape and described what was going on with the landscape, the different specimens there. He developed the new scientific geography. The new scientific geography was observation. It was observation. We use observations to understand the science. We go out there, we observe, we establish patterns. The patterns give us new knowledge. And insisted that geography be empirical. Empirical meaning observation. Geography is observable. Now his contribution, his writing, the Erdkunde, which is the earth, the science of the earth in relation to nature and the history of mankind. Here we have the combination of science and history, geography and history, the complete record. We are influenced by the earth. We influence the earth. It was 19 volumes long, and it got in those 19 volumes. He only described the geography and history of Africa and Asia, leaving the other continents out. A significant contribution. Okay, so now I want to get into the history lesson is over. Now we go into what's happening now. Or I should say, before we get into that, after Humboldt and Ritter died, essentially classical geography ended. And so we have the specialization of the subject matter disciplines resulted in the development of new technical jargons, new paradigms of scientific behavior. In other words, after Humboldt and Ritter, Ranke, and all of the universal geographers, historians, we get into specialization. And specialized science, as you will soon learn, it was the negative aspect of where we are. So, universal geographers, knowing everything that influences everything else, the interactions between certain subjects, no longer available after 1850s, 1860s. So the thesis for the rest of this presentation is the return of the universal knowledge. Is it possible to attain universal knowledge in today's society? Eric, you say no. You say no. Anybody else want to agree or disagree? Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Oscar Hanlon in 1981, he was a historian, in his book Truth in History, he writes, "The tendency toward specialization more seriously than ever inhibits the search for connections, for the synthesizing aspects highly valued in the 1930s," and I'm going to add to that to the early 1800s. When we specialize, we leave out all the other aspects of existence, all the other aspects of study. And so we are limiting those wonderful investigations, those wonderful discoveries that we could find if we knew a little bit about everything. Specialization today is at an all-time high due to the use of technology by the young. Does this face look like it's a happy one? The result of this situation will be the demise of culture and knowledge. What am I talking about? I am existing, but I am unaware because I lived through this. I lived through Facebook. I lived through what's happening in other people's lives, but their lives are not connected to the outside world. This is the bubble in which many people live. Around, that's it. Beyond, I ask students, what's going on in the world today? I don't know. But I heard somebody on Facebook. That's great. It's a problem. It's a problem. This is a specialized situation. The specialization of today, the use of technology. Okay, when we want to know something, what do? We Google it. We Google it, there's the answer. No further investigation. We found the answer. There was a teacher. There was a teacher that said, why teach this when they can Google it? Why teach this when they can Google it? That hurts. When I was this tall and I wanted to know something, I didn't have computers. I had smoke signals, slabs of concrete that I chiseled. No. I'd take a flashlight when my parents were asleep. I'd take a flashlight and go to the bottom of the bookshelf and crawl along and find the right volume in the Britannica Encyclopedia, pull it out, take it back to my bedroom, put the covers over my head, flashlight, and read. And read. Anything that interested me, I wanted to find out. And the Encyclopedia Britannicas were awesome. Now we have the internet. It's a little easier. But I missed that opening up and the smell of a book. The problem with education in relation to science and culture and knowledge is that some teachers, they want to just Google it. Just Google it. Just Google it. If I were a student today, I would be raising up arms and saying, this isn't right. Because what happens? What happens when we have teachers that say, just Google it? This is what happens. Demise of culture and knowledge. Another aspect of specialization is the fact that we do not converse with each other. I call a student with an issue, no answer. Oh, but I text the student, I get an instant reply. My mother teaches speech and communication at IUPUI. She had a student that had an issue. I don't agree with the grade that you gave me on this particular speech. Mother responds, come to my office, bring all your stuff, and we'll talk about it. No student shows. The student emails again, the same thing. Mother says, come to my office, bring all your stuff, and we'll talk about it. Nothing happens. We don't like confrontation. And so what happens is we don't get anywhere because we're afraid of negativity. We're afraid of that being proven wrong. And so this is a specialization that's going to get us in trouble. Selective learning. Selective learning. I don't want to learn that. I have no desire to learn that. How do you attach a document to an email? Well, you do this, this, and this. Can you do it for me? I don't want to have to do it. Oh, but you give somebody a new device, and they know how to text, they know how to put all the emotes or whatever you people call those things on your texting machines. Only selective learning. I only want to do what I want to learn. Okay? At conferences, geographic conferences, AAG, some of the geophysics conferences, what happens is instead of having a conference session that everybody attends, one room, we have multiple rooms where they are in little cliques. And they only isolate themselves into these groups, and then there's no knowledge passed to and from. Yeah, we have lots of journal articles that we can read, but some not reading everything. Not only should we be reading geographic information, but we should be reading physics. We should be reading chemistry. We should be reading the literature. We should read communication journals. That way we have a well-rounded aspect of who we are and where we are. So, integrative learning, it is the model of universal knowledge. We have this here at Eastern. Integrative learning is the hopes that we will be able to understand who we are through doing many things and attending many courses. Now, many students, when I ask, what's the purpose of general universal education? It's a waste of time. It's the way the university gets its money. But there's a reason for it. There's a reason for general education. It emphasizes the observation of the world. How we can understand each other and our own field if we go and do another field. Some of you have been in my weather and climate class. What does weather have to do with anything? Weather has all kinds of things to do with you. What you wear, where you go, how you live, those kind of things. But it also relates in other aspects. Whether you're going to play football this weekend or not. Understanding the linkages between art and science. Universal knowledge or universal education provides for the understanding of linkages between art and science. Courses should not be taught just like, here's the concept or a fact, here's another fact. We should understand that this fact links to this fact. And so we have a linkage. The concepts, the facts are not that important. It's how they're interlinked or interact with each other. The increase, we take universal education. I'm changing this. See, not general education, universal education. It increases the pattern recognition and problem solving. Being able to identify patterns. Being able to problem solve. If we understand patterns, then we can problem solve very quickly. My students broadcast meteorology. In order to understand what's going on with the environment, in order to forecast accurately, they have to be able to understand the patterns. When you see a chain of lows, a low pressure attached to a cold front, another low pressure attached to another cold front, and then a low pressure attached to another cold front, that's a chain of lows. What happens when you see that on a chart? The system doesn't go fast. Even though the model says it's going to go fast, it goes slow because it's like tugging between each other. And so that's a pattern. You problem solve the situation. You are able to accurately forecast. I want to bring another aspect here in a moment. Provide a foundation of understanding society. Universal education, it gives us the foundation of understanding who we are and how we interact with each other. But more importantly, globalization, how we interact with other nations. If we continue, here's the crux of the problem. If we only stay in our own little bubble, how do we, as the United States, intend to interact with other nations? It's a problem. Oh, I'll just text the premier of Russia. Maybe he doesn't have a texting device. How do you solve world hunger if you don't go to that particular location to help solve problems? You change the issue. I want to bring a couple of examples that we can incorporate universal education and other aspects. We can go out into the world and observe it and bring it to our own lives, and then we pass on that knowledge to our young. Maybe you'll have children. Maybe your child in the future will ask you, why is Yellowstone a megavolcano? Well, because you had earth science, you'll be able to answer that. Here's another situation that is universal. We have our star football team back there. Universal football. Universal football. Not only do they have to know what's going on within their own ranks, but they got to be able to quickly problem solve the other team's moves so that they can interact. That is essentially what I'm asking of our society today, is to not specialize, but to be able to be universal, to be able to understand what the other might be thinking, what the other situation might be doing, so that you can problem solve quicker and ID certain patterns. The other thing is converse with others. Talk to your elders. Talk to grandma, grandpa. Just go to, Lincoln Garden and sit and maybe hold a conversation with others that they men's club. That they sit there and they talk about politics and everything else in Central Illinois. It's fascinating just to hear their points of view. But you also bring something back to your own life. You understand, how do you fit in that particular setting? That's what I used to do with my grandfather would take me. When I was a little kid, I'd listen, and that's another thing. I didn't speak until I was spoken to. So I did a lot of listening. I did a lot of listening and understanding of the history and the geography of who I was in a very big world. Okay, so the universal idea, the education of all the threads of earth provides for the creation of a view of the world that promotes progress. If we can educate ourselves of all the threads of earth, and I'm talking about all those disciplines and all those fields of study, if we can incorporate that, if we can incorporate and take excitement in our universal education, then we might be able to have a better worldview that promotes progress. Progress comes about through understanding all the interconnections. And then finally, in the universal doctrine, we, the promoters, teachers of society, must never allow a group or individual to sever the ideals of what was set in motion before specialization changed the world. Now, what I'm saying here is that there are ideas floating out there to get rid of universal education. We cannot let that happen. Because if we let that happen, then future generations will not be able to do math problems in statistics, or will not be able to go to a concert, and I'm talking a symphonic concert, to understand what's going on behind the meaning of that particular piece. We will just be hermits in our little bubbles, and that progress will be very, very slow. So engage in geography, engage in physics, engage in chemistry, engage in literature, music, art. We cannot, as future parents, we cannot allow the school corporations to remove art from its curriculum, or it will result in the demise of culture. Now, I'm not saying specialization is bad. It's good to have a climatologist, a geomorphologist. It's good to have a doctor that focuses on bones or child rearing or physics, nuclear physics, those things. It's great, but we must incorporate the other aspects because they all interconnect. They all interconnect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I ask you to give our speaker a standing ovation?
It's great to bring your own audience. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, have a seat, please.
About it this way. When you graduate, you're going to be competing not with 5 people for a job. You're going to be competing with thousands because of population increase. People are going to want that same job that you're applying. But you increase that what your resume has in store because you've done a lot more here at Eastern, you're going to get that job. You concentrate on those aspects of your education, you're going to get that job.
May I use the illustration you gave by the encyclopedia and your struggle or fight to get knowledge and so forth, and compare it to Google? Now people say Google it and you'll find it. I wonder if you can elaborate a little on this, that what our generation, and I say our generation, including myself, when we go to Google, that's the easiest way to find anything. It's under your fingertips and you get it. It's reducing the struggle that you go with a flashlight in the night and search and find and go to the page, and you spend maybe 2 hours to find the point that you want.
Right.
Now, Google is reducing this into 2 seconds.
Yes.
And you have 2 billion things coming in 5 seconds.
Right.
Or something. Now, would you, I ask you to elaborate, it's not the 2 hours that we used to spend to come to the knowledge and the 1 second that Google would do that we are missing.
Yes.
So that we are not inviting newer generations to go to do this, but I think the difference would be after I got the information. Now, I'm fortunate with Google. Google is my friend. I mean, he brings me the information. It is what I do with the information after what happens to my mind if I settle with the idea? Yes, that's the answer. So the professor said, Google it. I Googled it. I found the answer, and that's it. Didn't go to my Facebook or do this thing or party or whatever. I think after you got the information, is the real you, is what you do with this information.
Right.
The burning desire.
Yes.
That let you go. I mean, we can have the same burning desire that let you go.
That's exactly right.
To Google.
Right, and one of the things that as in painting in my mind as I'm doing it is like, okay, I'm looking for this, but it's not quite what I want. So then I got to look another or see also, and then I'm looking at various other volumes to look for that specific thing that I'm looking for. In Google, we look for the search terms,
Yes.
what we're looking for to narrow down our.
Now, that's question for all of us. Since you came here to get a credit for coming to this class or whatever, but I think if you leave this room with a burning desire to know first, is there anything not right or wrong with our generation, not your generation, but the whole society? I'll give you examples. 95 or 97% of my students, when we talk about global technology and effects, 95 or 97 of them would say, technology makes us lazy. Only 1% would say it is our reaction to the technology that makes us lazy. We choose to be lazy. Technology helps us to get this, but technology doesn't make us lazy, actually. It's us, we decide to become lazy after we get the information. So that's one thing. The other thing, the other phenomenon, 95% almost, give and take, wouldn't feel bad, really bad, and cry when they hear that the American students are doing 74 in a scale of whatever in the country. It's science and technology and the math and so forth. They are declining. Our status as the strongest or better or best education system is dissolving. And while our generation is occupied with this, and Friday is the party Friday, and Wednesday Friday.
No, you're forgetting Thursday.
And Thursday, and don't talk about Monday because we are, and thank God it's Friday and all that. So actually, really, we are a group, as a nation, of people who like to be entertained. If the professor don't crack jokes for us, we sleep. Even in a church, even pastors, now preachers would crack jokes to
keep them awake.
Everybody, we are people of entertainment. We like to be entertained. If somebody gives us something deep thinking, oh, give me a break. If I ask my students to write a little, you see students do like this, exactly. Young people, strong muscles. Oh, my fingers hurt. And I tell them, have you heard, as we speak, now, as we sit here, have you heard about 4 years old to 12 years old, as we speak, they memorize a song book of 250 pages with melody in a different language, without understanding a single word. And they memorize 250 or 30 pages of melodies that are not their culture even. It's just songs to them. And they don't understand any word of it. And they compete, and one of the questions for them would be, one of the people say, tell me, continue what, or complete what I say. I say, ta-ra-ra-ra. And the 5 years old would, yes, capture it and do it. Without understanding anything. I'm talking about the fire inside people to do something like this guy who was philosopher and whatever you said.
All those fields, yes.
I'm talking about this fire. I'm talking about this. What would you say about that?
The fire? I got it.
The thing that it's making America going down and making the world
apathy. Apathy. I think that, would you agree? That we simply, like I say, to a student, why are you not engaged in weather and climate? I just don't like it. I don't care about it. It has nothing to do with me. That hurts. There's a lack of fire. It hurts for me, even though I'm standing here and performing for them, and I'm trying to give them information and making it relate to their lives. all of our discussions, I know they get tired of my stories, but the stories mean something to them. And then they take that, and then one day, those stories will mean something to them when it happens to them.
When they talk to their kids and grandkids.
Right. Yes.
Now, let me ask a question. Could it be that because the society is getting God out of, you mentioned something about the first one we talked about, Ritter.
Humboldt.
He said that Humboldt, that we are connected to nature
Yes.
one way, and because nature is created by God and He is
Ritter. Yep.
there is a meaning. So I'm trying to understand the big meaning.
Right.
So could it be that when we pushed God out, said no God in this, no God in this, no God in this, so this generation is losing the backbone of everything.
Yeah.
They are losing. Actually, we are in a university here based or modeled after the first university in the 10th century.
Yes.
Was it Oxford or what was the old one? It was built, the university system, Eastern Illinois University, is based on the model of the first university of open-minded, search for the truth, to find God, yes, God, in the classroom, where now we say no God, and we are losing our foundations and keeping only the shell of free thinking, where with no freedom, actually.
Yes.
So is there something in that that is affecting the society, affecting everybody?
I just think a lack of interest. I think that students are just wanting to do their majors. How many are you really focused on your majors and just want to do your majors? Your major classes. That's all that you want to do. You have no desire to take art or music, but you're forced. Let me put it this way. How many of you are forced to take those classes here at Eastern? And everybody's hands should go up. Right. Okay, how many of you love taking those classes? Very few. Okay. That is a problem. There it is.
So if we have some people to think about this, and next symposium we can discuss.
That's
these
right.
things.
That's right.
I'm really grateful for our speaker that we have to finish it by any means. But thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
enlightening me.
Thank you.
And, thrilled my heart.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Very much.
Unfortunately for the seniors here, guess what you have to do? The topic is universal knowledge. Universal knowledge.
Oh, do we have to report about that,
Yes,
sir?
yes. In your own terms.
Do we have to write,
Into.
sir?
No, don't start. Let's go with due next Wednesday, okay? Next Wednesday. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of TED Talks?
TED Talks, very good.
I'm a big fan of that. You just reminded me.
Oh, really? Well, that makes me feel
You should
good.
do that. You should do it on TED Talks.
Next. These are things that led up to me being a historian. And then becoming a historian, I took weather and climate my last semester and physical geography, and my professor said, you've got a knack for this stuff. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go back and get a secondary degree in history so I can teach history. No, you're not. You're going to become a geographer. And what I found interesting, that there was interconnection. I thought that history explained everything about humanity, but not necessarily so. It was history and geography together that explains who we are on this planet. The interactions of the environment towards humanity. The things that happen in history, particular events, are influenced by other aspects of humanity and other aspects of the environment. And so I can now say that I am in a field that incorporates everything that could and will explain everything about the human record as well as the environment record. So that is essentially how I got to this day. Now, Alexander von Humboldt...
Stars, they lit the light for us, and we are following their steps. And it's always good to see how they did what they did and why they did it, to just understand how we deal with their inventions. Revolutions in science and technology paradigms is one of the sessions of the first EIU, Eastern Illinois University Technology and Science Symposium here in Charleston, Illinois. And as you see, this presentation is being videotaped, and it will be put online to the world. So maybe some people would see me in Australia or Mozambique or wherever. So we will have the wealth of experiences of our speaker, Cameron D. Craig. What are you going to tell us about?
I'm going to talk about the last of the universal geographers, Humboldt and Ritter.
It's all yours.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, guys. All right, yeah, the last of the universal geographers, it's an interesting topic. The thing is that we look at universal, and it is, the meaning said was you cannot simply take, for example, the Civil War and say, this is the result of the Civil War, from when it began to when it ended. You can't do that. You have to look at the years before that led up to the Civil War, and then what happened after the Civil War that influences something else down the line. We can't just take a section of our life and say, I got a history degree because I liked history. No, I first started out knowing only but music. My mother said I can't do anything but music. I didn't like that. And so when my friends were getting no jobs, I realized I've got to do something different. So what else do I enjoy? So watching the History Channel, I said, I like history. So there's a history. Not only did I just say, the start of the fall semester, 1999, I said I was going to take history and go into history, but there are things that led up to that. One is working night shift at Columbia House, where you buy 10 CDs for a penny or whatever. So I didn't like that. It was a challenge. So this is to have a comprehensive understanding of many or all aspects of a particular subject. So not only are we just talking about one field, but we're talking about many fields. Somebody that has a bunch of knowledge about everything. Now, universal understanding is all things relate and influence each other, such as climate and various other aspects as culture, topography, which is how the land is shaped. We're looking at history, music, psychology, anatomy. All these things interact. And many of the scientists and historians before the modern era, the mid-1800s, they began as universal whatever. They understood the interconnections, the influences, many aspects of their field and other fields. Now, what we're going to talk about are all these things, but I want to focus on history for a moment. History, which I began, my first degree is in history, and I learned that Ranke, who was a universal historian, essentially what he
Well, let me welcome you to revolutions. Usually revolutions are not something that you welcome people to, and but here are revolutions in science and technology paradigms. And I need not to mention to you how science and technology really revolutionize the way we live. We are the creators of technology and followers of science, but whatever we invent comes back and changes our lives. And there are many stars, so to say, inventors and philosophers and you name it in any field of technology, who were like